We are less than 30 hours away from free agency opening up in the NBA. So do we have any better idea of what moves the Knicks could make in the coming days? Welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley on SNY's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter pages. I'm Chelsea Sherrod alongside our SNY NBA insider, Ian Begley. And we have two amazing guests joining us. We're excited to have back Dan Graca, who will be joining us in a little bit. No stranger to SNY and host of the Dan Graca Show weekday evenings on 98.7 FM ESPN New York. And of course, no stranger to any of you watching, CP the Fanchise is here of Knicks Fan TV. We will be taking your questions, so get them in the comment section so we can answer those for you. But let's begin with the baseline, guys. Ian, what's the latest on the Knicks offseason front?
Yeah, I think where we are is, can the Knicks clear salary to get to that non-taxpayer mid-level exception? You know, these CBA titles are arcane. Can they get there? Can they get to be able to spend that 12.4? Maybe they don't want to pay the luxury tax. I haven't heard that, but can they get there and then avoid that first apron? I think they can. And the thing there is, Donte DiVincenzo is one of the guys who is prominent among their free agent targets. And I think that if this works out with Josh Hart opting in to his deal, and his deadline to opt in or out is, I believe, later today, then the Knicks would have the financial flexibility to get Donte DiVincenzo on that exception. And then, you know, you would have to clear a rotation spot for him via trade, but DiVincenzo is definitely a target for them. I think, you know, I know there's going to be other teams interested in DiVincenzo, but I think if the money is equal, other teams offering the same exception that the Knicks are, I believe DiVincenzo would choose New York. There's a lot of organic ties between DiVincenzo and the Knicks, including obviously Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart, his teammates at Villanova.
Yeah, we're going to get into Donte DiVincenzo in a little bit. And yeah, Josh Hart's deadline to decide if he's going to opt in to his contract is at 5 p.m. today, just like Ian mentioned later on today. But let's get into a guy that's kind of been on the Knicks' radar, at least for the past few seasons, Zach LaVine. Ian, friend of the show, Jake Fisher, reported the latest on Zach LaVine and the Bulls, saying that maybe the Knicks will kick the tires again on a serious LaVine overture this summer. Ian, is there any chance that the Knicks actually go in this direction?
I wouldn't rule it out. I certainly wouldn't rule out any kind of big move for the Knicks. I know they spoke early last season, just casually, about Zach LaVine. It's still not clear, though. Do the Bulls actually want to move Zach? I think if the Bulls made him available, the Knicks would certainly be in touch and put together an offer. But I don't know that Chicago is ready to do that yet. And all that you heard leading up to the draft was that they were probably going to stick together. Now, they already re-signed Nikola Vucevic, their center, so I would assume they run it back here. But again, if they do make LaVine available, I'm sure the Knicks would at least place a call and have an offer at the ready.
Yeah, Zach LaVine is set to make $40 million next season, but also it's been reported that the Bulls might want more in return for Zach LaVine. Then the market might value him, and even more than the Wizards got in that Bradley Beal deal. CP, how would you feel about a potential Knicks pursuit of Zach LaVine, considering what Chicago wants in return?
Yeah, I'm a little more open to it than I have been in the past. But as you said, his market value seems to be pretty high right now. And Chicago seems to want a young player and draft capital in return. Their re-signing of Nikola Vucevic, though, makes me think that they're not so motivated to trade Zach LaVine unless they're blown away by an offer. With Vucevic signing an extension with the Bulls, we'll see what happens with DeMar DeRozan, who's going to be on an expiring contract. I think those moves, how the Bulls move in free agency, will kind of tell us how motivated they are to trade Zach LaVine. But nevertheless, offensively, you know, he's an absolute walking bucket, highly efficient player who can come in here and give them a punch offensively. Defensively, we'll see what happens there. But it would be hard to give up a king's ransom for Zach LaVine when his team needs so much more, especially at the wing, to compete in the East.
No, yeah, for sure. We'll be keeping our eyes on that coming up. And Zach LaVine is entering the second year of a 5-year, $215 million deal. Okay, let's get into Josh Hart, just like we mentioned before. His deadline for deciding if he's going to opt into his contract is at 5 p.m. today. Ian, what could it mean if Josh Hart either accepts or rejects the player option?
Right. So if he opts in, he is on the books next year for $13 million. And that gives the Knicks more room, more money to work with before they hit that first apron, which in the new CBA is a little bit punitive. It would be tough for them to stay under the tax, even if Hart opts in and then they go ahead and sign a player to the mid-level exception that they have. They'd be probably right up against the tax unless they shed other salary. I would assume they're willing to cross the tax threshold because owner James Dolan has never shied away from spending money when his executives see fit. But that's just something to keep in mind. But if Hart decides to opt out, his cap hold is much bigger than $13 million. So it limits the Knicks a little bit financially. And the Knicks, I'm sure, would come to an agreement with Hart in free agency. But also, if he opts in, they can extend his contract in August for as long as 4 years and as much as, I believe, around $82 million. So that would be a nice incentive for Hart if he did opt in. I still think he'd be leaving money on the table. So I think you credit him no matter what happens if he opts in for sacrificing financially. But that extension would be out there for him if he did opt in.
Yeah, it's hard to know if he would give the team a break here in order to get a larger amount later down the road and accommodate his guy Donte DiVincenzo here, the whole Villanova threesome and CAA guys under the umbrella. But nevertheless, the Knicks and Josh Hart are a union that needs to happen. Knicks traded a first-round pick to get Josh Hart. Josh Hart came in here, and he was the glue that got this team that 5th seed in the East. I mean, a guy that plays on two ways of the floor, unselfish player, a key rebounder for this team offensively and defensively, a playmaker, a one-man transition. Josh Hart is very important to this Knicks team. So I expect the two sides to come to an agreement. In terms of how that's structured, we'll have to see. But this is a slam dunk for the Knicks, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been everything that this team could have hoped for coming in. All right, let's talk a little bit more of the state of the franchise. CP, I'll start with you. In his Levine up, Fisher also cited that the Knicks have been praised around the league for their patient approach. How do you feel about their patient approach over the past few seasons?
Yeah, so far so good. You know, they haven't mortgaged the future. They haven't panicked. And they've been trying to acquire pieces on the margins. You look at the Derrick Rose acquisition at the trade deadline 3 years ago, the Josh Hart acquisition at the trade deadline. They are trying to get guys that can play under Tom Thibodeau's system. Jalen Brunson was their home run acquisition last year. And so they've been trying to build this thing brick by brick and piece by piece. Now, the Spider Mitchell trade, where they weren't able to get him, you know, some people may still criticize that deal and say, well, the Knicks should have gotten him. But so far, you have to give them credit for being patient in this build. But soon enough, you know, the time is going to run out. They're going to need to make a move to improve this team. As Ian said, they're creeping up on that luxury tax. I believe they're still around 5th in the East when you look at the competition. Boston has improved. We'll see what happens with Milwaukee. Does Miami get Damian Lillard? If they do, they should shoot right back up there. Philadelphia, if Harden and Embiid come back, I'd still put Philadelphia ahead of the Knicks. So ultimately, they're going to need to make a move to improve this team. But so far, they've been patient in the build.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we're going to welcome back in Dan Graca. Thank you for joining us, Dan. We had a little bit of technical.
Glad we got all the.
Yeah,
glad we got all those gremlins figured out, Chelsea. Yeah. Ian, CP, I'm sorry. There's fashionably later, but this is just downright unacceptable. I'm sorry.
You're in HD now, Dan, so it's good, man. It's good.
We're on your time, Dan. Okay, Dan, coming to you on this question. How do you feel about the Knicks' patient approach over the last few years?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what CP said, I think that it's realistic. Look, Leon Rose and company, they're extremely deliberate in the way that they've gone about their business. I mean, that was evident last summer when they could have very easily went all in there and made the trade for Donovan Mitchell. I don't know if that would have brought them any closer to a championship this past season, but sometimes it's fool's gold on what you accomplish in a given season, right? They made it to the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. They were one of the last 4 teams still standing, but there's no guarantee that you're going to be as good next year, even if you run it back with the same group or even bring in a piece here or a piece there, because nothing says that the teams behind the Knickerbockers are not going to vault past them based upon moves they make during the summer. You know, you can't count some of those other teams out. So the way they're doing it right now, I actually applaud the franchise because there have been so many sins of the past with the Knicks where they'll go all in and make the big splashy move about a guy who has had a couple of big seasons in the past, and he's a big name, but he might not fit necessarily with what this team is trying to do right now. So the methodical approach to me, I think, is the way to go for this club, stockpiling the assets and then go for the big strike when you feel you're that ready to go for that championship.
Yeah, and one of their biggest assets right now, Dan, is Josh Hart. We just talked about him a bit. How do you feel about him returning, or the importance of the Knicks strategy and potentially keeping him if he does opt into his deal?
Oh, he's huge. I mean, he's actually absolutely huge. I mean, once they acquired him during the season, I would refer to it as the Josh Hart experience, right? I know it sounds like an amusement park ride a little bit, but I mean, what I mean by that is that you know what you're getting every single night when it comes to Josh Hart. The guy, I mean, you could sit there and map out the box score, and it's not about the points, but on both ends of the floor, this guy is going to give you effort. He fits like a glove. He is a New York Knickerbocker to a T. He's extremely valuable for this team, and I obviously don't think he's going anywhere, and the Knicks have to make sure they retain him.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting back to this question of the Knicks' patient approach, when do we get into the realm of the Knicks being too patient?
I don't know if we're there this summer. I think you could justify running it back and adding a DiVincenzo with a subsequent trade to open up a rotation spot for DiVincenzo, because this team won 47 games last year, won a playoff series, exceeded almost everyone's expectations. I think you can say, hey, we're right to run it back here. We want to see what this group can do based on internal development and adding a player like DiVincenzo. So I don't think you're there yet this summer. But let's say this coming year, you run it back, Knicks backslide a little bit, then the heat will be on the front office, just like it was the year that they struggled following their first playoff appearance. The heat was on for them to improve off of that bad season in 2021-2022. They did that. They improved. So I think you'd be in that situation again where it would be time for them to make a big move. With regards to them making a big move this summer, two things. One, Quentin Grimes, I think, would be the first player, one of the first players, or near the top of the list for any GM talking to the Knicks about a big-time trade. I'm sure that any team would seek him. Would the Knicks part with him? I don't know. They obviously did not last summer in those Donovan Mitchell trade talks. The other thing, I am pretty sure that Julius Randle will not be involved in any big trade package here. I don't think he's going to get moved based on everything I've heard and just based on how the Knicks have operated to date. I'd be surprised if he was included in any big trade that the Knicks made in terms of sending him out. I think there's a lot of support for Randle internally, and so I don't think he will be moved. Again, call me out later on if he is moved, but I can't see it happening.
Yeah, guy, it's incredible to me. It really is when it comes to the subject of Julius Randle, because on my shows, I get flooded with calls from fans who just want to throw this guy overboard because of what happened in the playoffs and because of what happened in the playoffs 2 years ago against the Atlanta Hawks. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. You know, maybe they taught this lesson in school the day that I was absent, guys. But 25-10 in this league doesn't grow on trees. Like, you can't go to the store and find 25-10 on the discount rack. There's one of a handful of guys in the NBA. You know, you're talking Giannis, you're talking Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, Anthony Davis. Oh, and Julius Randle. He's the other 25-10 guy. And you want to part with that if you're a Knicks fan because he didn't maybe perform to the level of his regular season exploits in the playoffs? Guys, I mean, he's all NBA 2 out of the last 3 years and all-star 2 out of the last 3 years. Knicks fans, it's almost like for a second they forget that they're thinking they were maybe the San Antonio Spurs for the last 20 years and did nothing but win. I mean, the Knicks have not had players like this. This was a guy, remember, a few years ago in the summer of 2019 when the Knicks were the laughingstock of the league because all the big money free agents didn't even want to take a meeting with them. KD Kyrie went to Brooklyn. Right? LeBron goes to L.A. You had Kawhi go to L.A. Meantime, the Knicks pivoted, signed a bunch of one-year guys, but then here's Randle, signs for a couple of years, and he blossoms into an all-star, all-NBA player for you. And the Knicks fans want to get rid of this. One last thing on this, and this is what I always retort with. Guys, who was the MVP of the league this past year? The guy in Philadelphia, right? Did he play as well in the playoffs as he did during his MVP regular season? The answer is no. It's such a small sample size. I don't know why the fans want to pivot from somebody like that. It's mind-boggling to me.
No, yeah, 25-10 doesn't grow on trees. And CP, yeah, I want to come to you on this because Of course, yeah, he's an all-star and we see what Julius Randle can do. But when it matters most in the postseason, you see a little bit of a drop-off, of course that's going to raise some eyebrows to the fans. So, CP, I want to hear from you on your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think that's the big question mark. 25-10, it's been remarkable. He's had 2 out of his, the last 4 or 5 years has been solid with the Knicks. But the question is, can he come up and deliver in a big spot? And that's yet to be determined. The Hawks series, he underperformed. Now, this year, if you want to blame the ankle injury, sure, you can put something on the ankle injury. He came up against 2 of the best big man defenders in the league, and Bam Adebayo and Evan Mobley in those series. But the big question is, can he deliver for you in a big spot? Jalen Brunson certainly has showed that over the last 2 years in pressure moments in the playoffs against gritty defenses. Julius Randle has to show that. But I'm with Dan in that if you are going to trade him at this stage in the game where this team is trying to get to, they're trying to keep going up. They're not going to pull it back. And so if you're going to do that, you need equal or better value in any trade that Julius Randle is going to be in. Anything less just doesn't make sense. I get the Obi hive. They see his numbers as a starter and his efficiency. I don't think they're comparable players. I don't think you just plug Obi Toppin in there and he gives you an all-star level performance, whether it's, offensively, defensively or on the boards. He can certainly help, but I don't think you replace that production that Randle gives you just by swapping in Toppin and, a couple other pieces off of the bench.
Yeah, no, valid points from the both of you. Okay, we do have a fan question, and this one is for Ian. It's from Good Life via YouTube, and they say, can extensions like for IQ, Immanuel Quickley, happen today or just as of tomorrow?
Yeah, excuse me, as of tomorrow and then up until the day before the regular season. So there's a long window there for the Knicks and Immanuel Quickley side to talk and see if they can find some common ground on extension. Usually if you're not at the top of the draft, your extension gets done later in the offseason, right before the regular season, that late deadline. Usually that's the case. There have been some instances where, guys who are mid to late first round picks get extensions done earlier in the offseason, but it's pretty rare. So the Knicks do have a long window here to negotiate with Immanuel Quickley and, again, see if there's some common ground there. And then if you're talking about a trade, you could extend and trade Immanuel Quickley, and then the team taking on Immanuel would have that extension in place. Just a thought as we continue to talk about Knick trades, that is in play here just in terms of what the Knicks could do with Quickley in potential moves.
Yeah, okay, so as of tomorrow. All right, CP, we have another fan question. This one's coming to you from Alan Alford via YouTube, and they say, would Myles Turner be a better option than Karl-Anthony Towns? He brings offense, but without giving up rim protection.
No, I don't see that. If you're going to go get a center like that can space the floor, you go out there and get a Karl-Anthony Towns. Now, Turner might be cheaper, but do I think he's necessarily a better option than Towns? No, I wouldn't see it that way. Both guys, though, are intriguing options by allowing the Knicks to see better floor spacing, which would allow Jalen Brunson to operate better on his drives, even Julius Randle to operate with a lot more space on his drives. And so both of those players are very intriguing, but that would demand the Knicks make a drastic move to their starting 5, which is something that I think they need to consider. Does that happen this year? I don't think so. But as the years go and you look at the starting 5 with Brunson, with Grimes, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, and Mitchell Robinson, they have to figure out if that 5 is optimal in terms of shooting, floor spacing, defensively as well. And so ultimately that decision is going to come. And I think those 2 guys could help on the offensive side. Defensively with Towns, I don't necessarily see it, but Turner can give you some good rim protection as well.
CP, you mentioned shooting, and I think just to pivot a little bit, in the aftermath of the season and leading into the draft, I think the Knicks said internally, we know we need shooting. And, where do you get it from? Well, there's a free agent coming out of Brooklyn, Seth Curry. I don't know if it's possible because you're not going to have a ton of money, but I wonder if they knock down that door and see if they can get anything done there. The other thing is I was told that the Nets have had discussions with teams about trades involving Joe Harris. So if Joe Harris is out there and available, obviously fantastic shooter, maybe that's an opportunity for you to shed some salary in that trade. I think from a net perspective, they're probably doing all they can to prepare to match a big offer sheet for Cam Johnson because they want to bring him back. You bring him back on a big number. There's luxury tax implications there. So I think that's part of what's going on in Brooklyn. But nonetheless, a couple of shooters over there available. In terms of Karl Towns, I haven't heard anything concrete in terms of Minnesota, being willing to part with him. I think teams have checked in. I think Boston checked in before they made the Porzingis deal. So teams have talked to Minnesota. I haven't heard anything about them being willing to get off of him and talk about it in a serious way.
Okay, we do have another fan question. This one's for you, Dan. It comes from M. Rivera 4396 from YouTube. And it says, are the Knicks really going to run it back with the same team? What is the biggest need for the Knicks right now?
Good question. No, I don't think they're going to run it back with exactly the same team. I mean, that's rare in the league these days. And we've been talking about it. I think everybody's been talking about it. It's pretty obvious, right? The biggest need for this team, I think, is some shooting. CP brought it up. You need some floor spacers there. I mean, look, we saw what happened in the playoffs. And when you're playing late into the spring like that, guys are going to get beat up. You're close to 100 games, and guys aren't going to be feeling their best. And it was too much Jalen Brunson having to carry the scoring load last year in the playoffs, for various reasons. You need some shooters. You can't have more of these games in big money situations where you have the team collectively shooting, 7 for 36 from three. You need some guys to be able to come in and to be able to get you some points from beyond the arc there. And look, it's pretty evident. All the names that are being bandied about, whether it's Donte DiVincenzo, whether it's Seth Curry, like you said, whether it's a Bruce Brown, whoever, Knicks have to go out there and get some guys who can knock it in from the outside because they were way too inconsistent in that department when it mattered.
Yeah, Ian, you mentioned Donte DiVincenzo earlier in the show, but can you reiterate what the latest is on him?
Right. So there's, I think, several teams that are going to have strong interest in DiVincenzo once we get to that free agency period. Three that I had heard about. One was Minnesota, which should have access to that exception that we're talking about the Knicks having access to as well. Another is Chicago, which also should have access to that exception. Then the third is Detroit, which that's interesting because they have significant cap space. So if they wanted to, they could offer DiVincenzo a contract north of where that exception starts, which is around $12.4 million, I believe. So I think there's going to be competition for DiVincenzo, but I do think, again, the money's equal. I would think that he chooses New York because of those organic ties. Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, his college teammates at Villanova. And you guys talk about shooting. This surprised me. DiVincenzo ranked third in three-point field goal percentage on the Warriors last season behind Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. So he knocked the three ball down at a very good rate. And that's not something that you saw from him a ton previously in his career, but maybe he comes here and he knocks down shots for this team and he helps spread the floor.
Yeah, Donte DiVincenzo, 39.7% from three in the regular season for the Warriors. CP, I want to come to you. Do DiVincenzo or Bruce Brown have a good Knicks fit in your mind?
Yeah, I would like both those players on the Knicks. When you look at DiVincenzo, as you guys said, close to 40% from three. Another great rebounding guard next to Josh Hart. Donte DiVincenzo near the top of the league in offensive rebounding percentage. Defensively led the league close to, I think, 90th percentile in steals percentage as well. So a guy that's going to get after it on the perimeter gives you another guard that can get out and transition for you. So DiVincenzo can certainly help. And Bruce Brown, you got to like his two-way ability, his ability to get to the rim and finish at the rim. Another area of need for the Knicks. Guys that can get you easier buckets, high percentage buckets. A guy like a Bruce Brown can do that for you. With Bruce Brown, I like his ability to cut off ball, one of the better off-ball movers at the guard position and off-ball screeners at the guard position in the league. And now that would be up to Tom Thibodeau to emphasize more off-ball movement in his offense. That's another story for another day, but those two guys can certainly help. And even though, a lot of fans will question, well, where they're going to play, where the minute's going to come from, the way I look at a potential acquisition of Donte DiVincenzo or Bruce Brown is if the Knicks are working with that mid-level around $12 million, and you look at the guys who they realistically have a shot at, these two would probably be the best player available if you're going to use kind of like a draft concept. So for me, you go get those guys. Obviously, they can help this team, and you kind of worry about it later, how you're going to make it work with the minutes, but they'll give you some flexibility to make trades down the road, whether it's an existing player on your roster or one of these two guys to go upgrade the team even more.
Yeah, either of them could be reliable depth options for the Knicks. Okay, Ian, here's a question for you. A report came out earlier from The Athletic about the Lakers' interest in Bruce Brown Jr. for the mid-level exception. What's the Knicks' current interest level in Bruce Brown?
Yeah, I know that there are people over there who think very highly of Bruce Brown. Obviously, played a key role for the Denver Nuggets in winning a title. I would assume that he would get more than the mid-level exception. But, listen, I think that he played in this city with Brooklyn, and there are certainly, I think, people on the coaching staff that like Bruce Brown a lot. So you're going to see some overlap between teams interested in Bruce Brown and teams interested in Donte DiVincenzo. I think they have a similar market. Maybe Brown goes first, DiVincenzo goes second. But those are the two top wings in that mid-level exception area that you're looking at. And I think that, if things fell apart with DiVincenzo, if it didn't work out, I think the Knicks would be aggressive on Bruce Brown.
I agree with you. When you talk about Bruce Brown, you talk about maximizing your value at the perfect time, right? Winning a championship, playing a key role as, a support player for the Nuggets going into free agency like this. That's great. I think Ian hit it on the head when he talked about the experience of playing in this city, albeit it was in Brooklyn, so he'd be familiar with that. But both of these guys, Brown and DiVincenzo, they're winners. And you can't have enough winners be part of your program. Yeah. That was one of the things. Forget about the fact that Jalen Brunson was, performed above and beyond last year. But everything people said about Brunson was the fact that this guy won in college. Well, DiVincenzo won in college. DiVincenzo won with the Milwaukee Bucks. Right. I know the Warriors didn't win last year, but still, you're part of that Warriors culture, albeit for a brief time, whatever it was. I mean, that has to sort of rub off on you a little bit. So either one of these players, if they were to join this franchise, you're bringing winners, guys who help you get to that next level in your program. I don't think that's ever a bad thing.
It's a great point.
Along with that chemistry. Okay, we have another fan question. This is from Juan Mayeres from YouTube. Ian, with Derrick Rose's option being declined, does that limit us from matching salaries to make trades?
Well, it takes away an option the Knicks would have had they picked up Derrick Rose's team option. But I think part of that was about Derrick Rose and maybe finding somewhere else to go, and maybe the Knicks not wanting to handcuff Rose in a way that left it up to chance based on throwing him in a trade. But they do have enough, right, to get a deal done without Rose available, without his salary available, because you have Evan Fournier's salary, which is over $18 million. It's a salary match. And then you have other players who have salaries that are kind of in the middle class there, like Isaiah Hartenstein or even a Mitchell Robinson, RJ Barrett, higher end salary, $23 million. So they have salaries, different permutations to make deals work even without that Rose contract.
Ian, quick question for you. Evan Fournier. What's the prospects of a Fournier trade? Because as you look around the league and you're seeing quality players being acquired for kind of low value. I mean, you look at a John Collins who finally got traded by the Hawks, but I mean, he was had for a second rounder and some salary filler. What does that mean for an Evan Fournier at his contract if the Knicks aren't able to put that in a larger deal for a better player? Would they still be able to trade Fournier?
Yeah, I think, Collins, multiple years left on his deal. The where we are with Fournier that makes him valuable is it's an expiring contract, and that I think takes on greater value in this new CBA. I was told before the draft that the Knicks were approaching Fournier and his contract as if it was very, very valuable. They weren't in a rush to throw it in a deal. However, you're talking about DiVincenzo, you're talking about Bruce Brown. I would assume the Knicks want to shed some salary if they're going to bring in somebody on the mid-level exception. And Evan Fournier's contract, if you pair him with another player, is an opportunity to do so if a team wants to get an expiring deal. And I assume many teams do, because, again, you're going to have to open up that rotation spot for one of those guys. You're going to want to shed some salary. So I think, Fournier's contract is out there and will be very valuable for the Knicks, no matter if they use it in a big deal or a deal where it's Fournier and then just one other rotation player going out to create that room for the free agent they bring in.
Yeah, I think Fournier has value to some teams around the NBA. It's just he doesn't have any value anymore here to the Knicks. And I mean, most of us kind of figured out that it was a mistake when they signed him to the contract that they did once upon a time. You just knew that it wasn't going to work out here. But I got to be honest with you, and maybe I'm in the minority or was in the minority. And it goes back to the need that we spoke about for the team to improve their shooting. During the playoffs, when they were going through those spells, especially against Miami, when they couldn't throw the ball in the ocean, I was one of the people saying, you know what? Throw Fournier in the game for 10 minutes. Just see if you can get anything for him. I mean, he's on this team because he could shoot some threes, and he's at one time or another in his career. I mean, that's why you gave him all that money, but they elected to go in another direction. We know that as long as this coaching staff is here, guys, let's face it, Fournier has no role in this team anymore. But the expiring contract, that does have value, to Ian's point, around the NBA. And you would hope, if the Knicks are going to look to upgrade this roster, that he's going to be one of the pieces that is going to have to go in the other direction.
Yeah, I thought they could have used his three-point shooting, especially in the Miami series. I mean, they were woeful from behind the arc. But, was Tibbs concerned with his defense, especially the way that Spoelstra and the Miami offense was running on all cylinders? That as soon as Fournier came into the game, they would have went right at him. But it was certainly worth a try, because this offense was stuck in the mud. And, a lot of that was compounded by he just didn't have enough shooters out there on the floor. You look at that last play, that last possession where Brunson turns the ball over uncharacteristically. I mean, the Miami Heat were paying zero attention to a guy like a Josh Hart. And so, you could have asked for Fournier in that series, and maybe things would have been a little bit different. But I think his days with the Knicks are pretty much over.
Yeah. Okay. Another fan question, and it is from Andrew Abraham. Ian, I don't know about you, but I feel like the Knicks would be interested in Torrey Craig. What do you think?
Look, CAA client, wing, a little bit similar, though not really, to DiVincenzo type, does some similar things. I think that maybe the interest would be there if they didn't get a DiVincenzo, if they did not get a Bruce Brown. But I think DiVincenzo is the top target. And then, Bruce Brown, I would assume, again, the money's equal and Detroit doesn't jump in there with a bigger offer. And then Knicks get to a place where they can comfortably use the full exception. I would assume that DiVincenzo ends up here. So I think Torrey Craig, if he's an option, that means the top options did not work out for New York.
Okay. Thanks, Ian, for that. CP, how do you feel about Obi Toppin and his current contributions? And also, throughout the whole season, it's really been a conversation just about the lack of minutes for Obi Toppin and the lack of usage for him. What are your thoughts on the current status of him with the Knicks right now?
Yeah, just seems like he's going to be relegated to that 10 to 12 minute spot right now, with Julius Randle still on the roster, with how Isaiah Hartenstein played this season. I think his minutes are pretty much guaranteed unless he's moved off of the team. So, and with Tibbs not wanting to go with smaller lineups featuring Obi and Julius Randle for too long of a stretch in games, I don't see his role changing. He's going to be in that spot up 3-point shooter role. Maybe he's able to get you some cheap baskets out in transition, but he certainly doesn't have much more of a role than that. We'll see how the trade market looks. Do they still entertain a trade for Obi Toppin? I think that'll have to be seen between now and the trade deadline, but I don't see him being brought back here on an extension because I just don't see it making sense for either side.
Yeah, I agree with CP.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, going to say, and this was a big topic last week, as a matter of fact, because, again, it goes back to the Julius Randle. Some fans that want to discard Julius, they think that Obi's going to slide right in and he's going to pick up that production immediately, which, I mean, some people are putting way too much stock into those last 5 games of the regular season when he started. Guys, I mean, think about it. That was against garbage teams late in the year. I mean, they played Indiana twice in the last 5 games, and Indiana was playing guys off the street, literally. You can't put all of your judgment on a player as to a couple of meaningless regular season games at the end. That's not fair. I mean, look, and I like Obi. I'm not going to sit here and try to knock him. I think he's got a role in this team, but do I think that he's going to grow and flourish as a Knick and ultimately become a starter? The answer is no, not as long as Julius Randle's still here. And I still haven't seen that growth in his game. I mean, he can't create his own shot. Right. I mean, there's still things that this guy still needs to do. And look, I'll ask a simple question. I mean, we're talking about fans that want to throw him in the starting lineup for the Knicks. Would Obi Toppin even crack the starting lineup for the Brooklyn Nets right now? Forget about the Knicks. How about Brooklyn? The answer is no there, too. So I just don't understand. I know he's a local guy and everybody likes him. I just don't understand the rationale with some of this stuff.
Well, I'd be surprised if they extended both Quickley and Toppin given, the penalties here, spending a lot of money in this new CBA. And the other thing on top, and we mentioned it before the draft, I think that there's enough of an organic relationship between Toppin and the organization to where they would work together to find Toppin a new home, a good opportunity for him to flourish in the year before his restricted free agency. I agree with you guys. I don't see a role opening up here via trade where you say, all right, now Obi Toppin's definitely going to play, 25 minutes a night. Maybe they surprise us and that happens, and then Obi Toppin is here, and then they pay him on a second contract. But I think short of that move happening, I believe they would work together to try to figure something out for Toppin. We know Indiana had interest in Obi Toppin prior to the trade deadline. Before Mike Winger took over in Washington, there were people with the Wizards front office under Tommy Shepard that had interest in Obi Toppin. I think there are some holdovers there to the new regime. I think you will see, I'm sure teams will call about Toppin. I'm sure the Knicks will discuss deals on Toppin. Just a matter of when and how this thing plays out over the next couple months.
Yeah, like how you said, it's just a matter of when, because for Obi Toppin, he just needs a better fit. Okay, Ian, almost 28 hours away from free agency opening. If someone missed most of the show and was just jumping in now, what is something that they should watch for heading into tomorrow?
Knicks making some kind of trade to free up some salary and to free up a rotation spot to get Donte DiVincenzo in the rotation, if indeed they do get that done. And I think that they will. Odds are that they will if they get the money right. I think they'll get Donte. And then it's about making a deal to free up the rotation spot, whether it's a big deal where you're, freeing up multiple rotation spots or just one with Fournier's deal and maybe an Obi Toppin. I think that's what you're looking for early on in the offseason if you're a Knicks fan.
Okay, thank you so much, Ian. Check out SNY.TV for the latest on Knicks and free agency. Plus, Ian will be on Honda Sports Night tonight after Mets postgame, but that will do it for us and this edition of the Putback with Ian Begley. Our very thanks to Dan Graca. Check him out on weeknights on ESPN Radio, 98.7 FM. And thank you so much to CP, the Fanchise. Check him out over on Knicks Fan TV. We will be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. for our live free agency special with both Ian and Steve Popper of Newsday. For Ian